The term Queen's Chain, now often referred to as the King's Chain, is a widely used colloquialism rather than a formal legal term. It describes the strips of publicly owned land, typically alongside the coast, rivers, and lakes, intended to provide for public access and recreation. Although the term itself does not appear in legislation, the concept is well established in New Zealand law through various statutes and historical instructions. Historical origins. The concept originates from the 1840 Royal Instructions issued by Queen Victoria to New Zealand's first governor, William Hobson. These instructions directed the reservation of certain lands for public purposes. 1840 Royal Instructions. Governor Hobson was instructed to reserve lands fit for recreation and amusement of the inhabitants, or for other purposes of public convenience, utility, health, or enjoyment. Case law notes that these instructions did not specify a chain-wide strip, approximately 20 metres or 22 yards, but they established the principle of reserving land along waterways for public use. Early ordinances. This principle was reflected in early colonial law. For example, the Land Claims Ordinance, 1841, prohibited land commissioners from recommending grants of land situated on the seashore within 100 feet of high water mark. This demonstrates an early legislative intention to keep the coastal margin in public ownership. Inconsistent application. In the years that followed, the reservation of land was inconsistent, partly because it was managed by provincial governments rather than central authority. Legislative framework. The informal instructions were later formalised through a succession of statutes, creating what are now known as marginal strips. Land Acts. The most significant step in formalising the Queen's Chain was the Land Act, 1892. This act made the reservation of land alongside waterways more explicit, largely due to the efforts of then Minister of Lands, John Mackenzie, who wanted to ensure New Zealanders could access rivers and lakes for fishing and recreation. This policy was continued under Section 58 of the Land Act, 1948, which provided for the reservation of strips of land from the sale or disposition of Crown land. This section has since been repealed and replaced by provisions in the Conservation Act, 1987. Conservation Act, 1987. Today, the primary legislative basis for the Queen's Chain is Part 4A of the Conservation Act, 1987, which governs marginal strips. Section 24. Marginal strips reserved. This is the key provision. It deems a strip of land, generally 20 metres wide, to be reserved to the Crown when the Crown disposes of any land abutting the foreshore, lakes, or rivers with a bed of 3 metres or more in average width. Definition of marginal strip. A marginal strip is defined in Section 2 of the Act as any land reserved under Section 24. Purpose. The purposes of these strips outlined in Section 24C include conservation, the maintenance of water quality, enabling public access, and providing for public recreational use. Legal characteristics. The legal status of the Queen's Chain, primarily as marginal strips, carries several important consequences. Public access. The public, generally, has a right of access on foot over marginal strips. However, this is not a universal right to all waterways, as it only applies where land was reserved from a Crown disposition, typically after 1892. The colloquial use of this term is sometimes seen in cases discussing access arrangements. Crown ownership. The land forming a marginal strip remains the property of the Crown. No title by adverse possession. Title to any land reserved from sale, such as marginal strip, cannot be acquired through adverse possession or user, regardless of how long an individual has occupied it. Fencing. The Fencing Act, 1978, does not apply to marginal strips, meaning an adjoining landowner cannot compel the Crown to contribute to the cost of a boundary fence. Interaction with other law. The existence of a marginal strip is a relevant consideration in determining claims for customary marine title under the Marine and Coastal Area Tākutai Moana Act 2011. Related concepts. The Queen's Chain is often used more broadly to encompass other legal mechanisms that secure public access to waterways, including Esplanade Reserves and Strips, created under the Resource Management Act 1991, often as a condition of a subdivision consent. Public roads. In some historical subdivisions, a one-chain paper road was surveyed along a coastline or river, which can provide a legal right of public access even if unformed. Public reserves. Land designated as public reserve under the Reserves Act 1977. To be more certain about the legal status of a specific strip of land, you should consult Part 4A of the Conservation Act 1987 for marginal strips, and the relevant provisions of the Resource Management Act 1991 for esplanade reserves. A search of the relevant land title records and survey plans will also be necessary to determine if a strip was historically reserved as a road or reserve.